The first letter arrived on a gray afternoon inside Stone River Correctional Facility, a place where time didn't move. It just circled endlessly like the buzz of the fluorescent lights. Ethan Cole had been locked up for 6 years, and in all that time, no one had written to him. Not his parents, not his old friends, not even the woman who'd promised to wait. He was 38, tired and angry at the world. At least until the day a pale blue envelope slid through the mail slot of his cell. The handwriting was neat, careful, almost delicate. It reads simply, "Dear Mr. Cole, I don't know you, but I believe everyone deserves someone to talk to." The name signed at the bottom stopped him for a second. Sabrina Brooks. She said she was a volunteer in a prison pen pal program, that she spent her weekends writing to inmates who had no family left. She talked about books, about music, about the magnolias blooming outside her apartment window in Jackson. She never asked what he'd done to end up there. She just wrote, "I hope you're finding small ways to stay human." Ethan didn't know what to make of it. At first, he thought it was some kind of trick, maybe a church outreach trying to save his soul, or worse, someone getting a kick out of writing to criminals. But something in her words felt real. Not pitying, not judging, just human. He wrote back the next day, scratching his message on a lined paper that smelled faintly of disinfectant. "Thanks for the letter. Not sure what to say. Been a while since anyone gave a damn." Over the next months, the letters became his lifeline. Sabrina's words had a rhythm, warm, steady, like a heartbeat under the noise of the prison. She told him about her life. She worked as a community counselor, loved jazz records and strong coffee, had a soft spot for stray cats. She mentioned she didn't have much family left, that she'd been through changes that made some people walk away. Ethan didn't press her for details. In prison, everyone had things they didn't talk about. He started to wait for mail, call like a kid waits for Christmas. The guards joked that he was in love with a ghost. But each letter brought a small piece of the world beyond those steel bars. The smell of rain on pavement, the sound of traffic at dusk, the taste of peach pie cooling on a windowsill. For a man who'd spent years surrounded by concrete, those words were oxygen. Sabrina had a way of seeing the good in him, or maybe the good she wanted to believe was still there. "You're not the worst thing you've done," she wrote once. Sometimes we all need someone to remind us of that. No one had ever said that to Ethan before. He found himself telling her things he'd never said aloud. About his mom dying when he was 12, his first arrest at 17, how he'd stolen from the wrong man and ended up behind bars. She never lectured him. She just listened. And somehow, that listening began to heal something in him. 9 months later, the letters turned into phone calls. The first time he heard her voice, it stopped him cold, low, smooth, with a faint southern drawl. She laughed easily, asked about his day, and told him she'd been praying for his early parole hearing. Before long, their call stretched past the 15-minute limit, ending only when the automated voice cut in. "This call will be disconnected." By the time Christmas came, Sabrina had written over 70 letters. Ethan had written back every single one. He'd drawn her sketches from pencil stubs, a magnolia flower, the prison yard at sunset, his hand reaching for hers through the visiting room glass. And on a cold January morning, she wrote the words that changed everything. "Ethan, I don't just want to write you anymore. I want to be your wife." He stared at that line for a long time. A convict, a stranger on the outside, and yet, somehow, she'd become the only real thing in his life. They filed for marriage through the state's Inmate program, exchanged vows over a video call, and signed the papers. To Ethan, she was his redemption, the one person who saw the man he could be, not the criminal he was. What he didn't know, what no one at Stone River knew, was that Sabrina Brooks carried a secret she'd been terrified to share. A truth that would soon turn their love story into a tragedy broadcast across every news station in America. It was a humid morning in early May when Sabrina Brooks walked through the gates of Stone River Correctional Facility for the first time. The sky was bruised gray, the kind of sky that makes everything look heavier. She carried a small purse, a folder of paperwork, and a nervous smile that trembled at the corners. Inside, the guards moved her through metal detectors and pat-downs. One of them, Officer Reese, gave her a long, skeptical look before waving her forward. "First time visiting an inmate?" he asked. She nodded. "My husband." He let out a short, humorless laugh. "Then you're in for a real treat." When the double doors opened into the visitation hall, the noise hit her like a wave. Scraping chairs, echoing voices, the constant clink of handcuffs. Rows of metal tables divided by glass panels. On the other side, men in orange uniforms sat waiting, faces both eager and defeated. And at the far end, Ethan Cole sat perfectly still, eyes locked on her like he couldn't believe she was real. For months, she had only existed in ink and paper, soft loops of handwriting, the sound of her voice through a crackling phone line. But now she was flesh and blood. She wore a navy dress and a simple silver cross around her neck. Her dark skin shimmered under the fluorescent lights. Her hair, long, pressed, immaculate, fell across one shoulder. When she smiled, something inside Ethan twisted, a warmth he hadn't felt in years. He stood up slowly, as if afraid she'd vanish if he moved too fast. "Hey," she said softly. "Hey yourself," he replied. His voice came out rough, cracked from disbelief. They sat across from each other, a thick pane of scratched plexiglass between them. Sabrina pressed her palm to the glass. Ethan hesitated, then did the same. For a moment, it felt like the world had shrunk to that single point of contact. They talked for an hour straight. About the letters. About the first time she heard his voice. About the life they'd build once he got out. Ethan told her she looked different than he'd pictured. "Better," he said, grinning awkwardly. She laughed, a full, rich laugh that turned heads around the room. "I told you," she teased. "I'm full of surprises." But beneath the laughter, something flickered behind her eyes, a flash of worry that came and went too fast for him to name. Halfway through the visit, a few inmates at the next table started whispering, glancing at them. Ethan didn't notice at first. He was too busy memorizing her face, her voice, every little thing he'd dreamed about for months. But one of the inmates, a tall man with tattoos creeping up his neck, leaned toward another and muttered something under his breath. The two of them snickered. Ethan's hand tightened into a fist. He turned. "What's your problem, man?" "Nothing," the tattooed man said, smirking. "Just didn't know they were letting that kind in here." Sabrina froze. The air shifted. Ethan stood halfway up before the guard barked. "Sit down, Cole." He sat, jaw clenched, eyes burning. Sabrina tried to smile it off, to change the subject. But the damage was done. Something about that moment, that snide comment, that half-hidden laugh, planted a seed he couldn't ignore. When the visit ended, Sabrina pressed her hand against the glass one last time. "I love you," she said. "Please remember that, no matter what you hear." He frowned. "What's that supposed to mean?" She hesitated, eyes glistening. "It just means the world isn't kind to people like me. I didn't tell you everything yet, but I will. I just need you to trust me." Before he could ask, the guard was already calling, "Time's up." The buzzer sounded sharp and final. Sabrina was escorted out, her footsteps echoing down the hall. Ethan watched until she disappeared behind the steel door. In the silence that followed, he felt something he hadn't felt in years. Not anger, not loneliness. Fear. Because for the first time, he realized he didn't really know the woman he had married. The next morning, the prison yard felt colder than usual. Even under the Mississippi sun, there was a chill that crawled up Ethan Cole's spine, the kind that came not from weather, but from the weight of eyes watching you. He could feel them, everywhere, Men sitting on the bleachers, leaning against the fences, pretending not to look, but looking all the same. The yard was a shark tank, and someone had just dropped blood in the water. It started with a rumor. A simple whisper traded between cells after the visiting hours ended. Yo, Cole's girl ain't what she seems. Then another voice added fuel. Saw her file in admin. You won't believe what it says. By breakfast, the whole block knew. By lunch, they had theories. Some said Sabrina had a record herself. Some said she used to be a man. Others said the guards knew, but kept quiet. In a place like Stone River, gossip wasn't just talk, it was ammunition. And soon, that ammunition was aimed squarely at Ethan Cole. That afternoon, while inmates lifted weights under the blistering sun, a wiry man named Ruiz wandered over to Ethan's bench press. Yo, Cole, Ruiz grinned, flashing gold teeth. That fine wife of yours, she used to play ball? Ethan frowned. What the hell are you talking about? Ruiz chuckled. Just saying. Heard she was on the team, if you catch my drift. The group around him snickered, a low ripple of laughter that cut deeper than any shiv. Ethan shot up, fury flashing in his eyes. Watch your mouth. But Ruiz didn't back down. Relax, man. We just talking. Ain't no shame in loving what you love, even if she used to have more balls than you. The laughter exploded. Ethan lunged before he even realized it, tackling Ruiz into the dirt. Guards rushed in, whistles screaming, boots pounding. Within seconds, they were both on the ground, hands cuffed, faces pressed to gravel. That night, back in his cell, Ethan sat on his bunk, blood still crusted on his knuckles. He couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. The echo of that laughter wouldn't stop replaying in his head. He told himself it was just lies, prison talk meant to mess with him. But the seed was planted now. And the more he thought about Sabrina's words, the world isn't kind to people like me, the more that seed began to grow. 2 days later, during mail call, his name wasn't called. No letter from Sabrina. No blue envelope. Nothing. That had never happened before. Not once. By the second week, the silence started to gnaw at him. He wrote her again, then again. No reply. Every unanswered letter made his chest feel tighter, his doubts louder. What if Ruiz was right? What if everyone was laughing because they knew something he didn't? He started replaying their first visit in his mind. Her deep laugh, the hesitation in her voice, the way she said, I didn't tell you everything yet. The clues were there, weren't they? He'd just been too blinded by hope to see them. Late one night, as the block slept, Ethan overheard 2 guards talking near the control booth. Yeah, that Brooks woman? Used to be named Samuel, I think. Fall said she transitioned years ago. Dude's married to her and doesn't even know. That's messed up. They laughed. The kind of cruel, easy laughter that belongs to men who think they're safe from consequence. Ethan's stomach twisted. His ears rang. The guards walked away, still joking. But inside Ethan's mind, something cracked, small at first, then spreading like a spiderweb across glass. He sat up, staring at the concrete wall. A cold, poisonous mix of humiliation and fury began to rise through his chest. She lied to me. She made me a fool. The next morning, when Ruiz saw him in the yard and smirked, Ethan didn't even react. He just stared calm, silent, eyes empty, because by then, Ethan Cole had already made up his mind. If Sabrina ever came back to that prison again, he wasn't going to let her leave the same way. Visiting day came again, a Tuesday, late June. The morning began like any other inside Stone River. The clang of steel doors, the bark of guards, the sour smell of disinfectant seeping into every breath. But for Ethan Cole, it wasn't just another day. He'd spent the night staring at the ceiling, hands shaking, his mind replaying every word he'd heard, every laugh that had followed him through the yard. He told himself it wasn't true. He told himself he'd ask her calmly. He told himself he'd listen. But beneath those promises, something else throbbed. Humiliation. The kind that burns hotter than rage. When the call came, "Cole, you got a visitor." He stood without a word, shoulders squared, jaw tight. The visitation room buzzed with the same stale rhythm. Guards pacing, families talking through glass, the hum of cheap lights. Then she walked in. Sabrina Brooks, his wife. Her smile wavered when she saw his face. Gone was the warmth from their last meeting. In its place was something cold, coiled, ready to strike. She sat down slowly, clutching her small purse, eyes searching his for the man she'd once heard laugh on the phone. "Hi, baby," she said softly. He didn't answer, just stared, unblinking. "I missed you," she tried again, voice trembling. He leaned forward, his voice low and sharp. "Why didn't you write me back?" Sabrina hesitated. I just needed time to figure out how to tell you something." "Tell me what?" Her hands shook in her lap. For a moment, she looked like she might back out, like the truth was too heavy to say aloud. But she took a breath and lifted her eyes. "Ethan, I was born different. Before I became Sabrina, I was Samuel." The air vanished between them. The sounds of the room, the voices, the hum, the guard's footsteps, all blurred into silence. Ethan blinked once, twice. Then, slowly, the words sank in. "You're saying, I'm a woman, Ethan," she said quickly, tears filling her eyes. "I always have been, but I wasn't born that way. I wanted to tell you sooner. You lied." "It wasn't a lie. It was me trying to survive. I was scared if I told you, you'd stop loving me." His hand slammed against the glass, so hard it rattled the bolts. "You're a man." Heads turned. The guard by the door shifted his weight, but didn't move in yet. These fights happen all the time. Most ended in shouting, not blood. Sabrina pressed her palm to the glass. "Ethan, please listen. Did you think I wouldn't find out?" His voice cracked, shaking with fury. "You had every damn guard in here laughing at me. No one's laughing. It doesn't matter where I came from. I'm still me." He laughed, a short, bitter sound that didn't sound human. "You made me a joke." Sabrina's tears spilled. "You're not a joke. You're the only man I've ever loved. Please, Ethan, don't let this destroy what we have. Don't you dare call me that." He shot up from his chair. The glass barrier between them wasn't fully sealed. The small service slot used for passing papers and food trays gaped open. The guard shouted, "Sit down, Cole." But Ethan didn't hear him. He leaned forward, voice breaking into a growl. "You should have told me before you put my name next to yours." "I tried. I was waiting for the right time." "There was never going to be a right time," he whispered, "because I never would have married you." Sabrina froze. Her shoulders slumped, face crumpling under the weight of those words. Then, in a single desperate moment, she reached through the slot, her hand trembling, fingertips brushing his. "Ethan, I forgive you," she said, "for everything." Something in him snapped. Before anyone could react, Ethan grabbed her wrist, hard. Her scream echoed through the hall. Then his other hand lunged forward, seizing her throat. "Cole, back OFF!" the guard shouted, rushing in, but the room exploded in chaos. Chairs toppled. Papers scattered. Sabrina gasped, choking, clawing at his arm. "You lied to me," he roared, shaking her violently. The guard pulled his baton, fumbling with the keys. But by the time they reached him, it was too late. Sabrina's body went limp. Her hand slid from his grip, nails scraping across the glass before falling away. For a second, everything went still. Ethan stared at her, eyes wide, chest heaving, as if he couldn't believe what he'd done. The fury drained out of him, replaced by something hollow, haunted. The guards dragged him back, slammed him to the ground, cuffed his wrists. But he didn't fight, didn't speak. He just kept staring at her motionless hand against the cold floor. And when they finally pulled him out of the room, he whispered the same word over and over again. almost too soft to hear. Why didn't you just tell me? The story broke less than 12 hours after the killing. By sunrise, every local station in Mississippi had the same headline splashed across the screen. Inmate strangles trans woman in prison visiting room. The footage looped again and again. Flashing lights outside Stone River Correctional Facility, a sheet-covered body wheeled into a coroner's van, and the prison warden's voice trembling as he read from a prepared statement. We can confirm that the deceased, identified as 33-year-old Sabrina Brooks, was visiting her husband, inmate Ethan Cole, at the time of the incident. Reporters pressed in. Was this a hate crime? Did guards fail to intervene? How could this happen inside a controlled facility? Warden Miller didn't answer. His eyes said enough. He knew something had gone terribly, irreversibly wrong under his watch. Ethan spent that night in an isolation cell. No mattress, no light, no noise but his own breathing and the faint drip from a leaky pipe. The adrenaline had worn off. Now there was only emptiness. He stared at the blood on his hands, dried, brown, cracked against the skin, and for the first time, he didn't recognize them. These weren't his hands anymore. They belonged to a stranger. The guards hadn't said much when they dragged him from the visitation room. One of them, Officer Reese, had spat near his boots and muttered, "You sick son of a bitch." Ethan didn't argue, didn't explain, because deep down, a part of him agreed. The prison psychologist visited the next morning, clipboard in hand, voice calm but distant. "Do you understand what happened yesterday, Ethan?" He didn't answer. "Do you know why you're here?" Silence. Finally, Ethan lifted his head. His voice was barely a whisper. "She lied to me." The doctor sighed. "That may be true, but that lie didn't kill her. You did." Ethan stared at the wall, that same blank gray wall he'd stared at for 6 years, and said nothing more. Outside those walls, Sabrina's story was spreading. She wasn't just a name in a headline anymore. She was a symbol. News anchors used words like bravery, representation, and violence born from ignorance. Candlelight vigils appeared across Jackson, Biloxi, even New Orleans. Photos of Sabrina, radiant smile, silver cross at her throat, flooded social media under the hashtag Justice for Sabrina. Activists demanded reform. Families of other inmates demanded answers. But inside Stone River, none of that mattered. To Ethan, all that existed now was silence, and the echo of Sabrina's voice whispering, "I forgive you." Detective Lila Monroe from the Mississippi Bureau of Investigation arrived 2 days later. A woman in her 30s with calm eyes and a clipped tone. She'd been through too many crime scenes to be shocked easily. She reviewed the footage, grainy security video showing Ethan and Sabrina seated across from each other, his sudden explosion, the struggle, the guard's frantic rush. When it ended, Monroe exhaled slowly. 46 seconds, she said. That's all it took. She went to the isolation wing that evening. Ethan sat on the floor, staring at nothing. "I'm Detective Monroe," she said. "I'm here to understand what happened." He didn't look up. "She lied," he muttered. "She made me into something I'm not." Monroe crouched down beside the bars. "She didn't make you into anything. You chose what to be." Ethan's eyes flicked toward her, bloodshot, hollow. "You ever been laughed at by 50 men at once? You ever been someone's joke?" Monroe's voice stayed steady. "No, but I've seen what happens when men let that laughter decide who they are." He didn't reply. She left him there, another ghost in a concrete box. By the end of the week, prosecutors filed charges, first-degree murder. Ethan's defense attorney tried to argue diminished capacity, temporary insanity, claiming the revelation triggered an emotional collapse. The public didn't buy it. Neither did the jury. Because no matter how they framed it, love, betrayal, humiliation, one fact refused to disappear. He'd killed someone who only wanted to be loved for who she was. That night, alone in his cell, Ethan found one of her old letters folded inside a confiscated envelope. He didn't remember how it got there. Maybe a guard had slipped it in. Maybe fate had a cruel sense of timing. It was dated 2 months before her death. I know there are parts of me you don't understand yet, but you don't have to understand everything to love someone. You just have to try. For a long time, Ethan didn't move, didn't breathe. Then the paper slipped from his fingers, landing softly on the cold floor. The last words of the only person who had ever truly believed he could change. Detective Lila Monroe sat at her desk in the dim glow of her office, surrounded by stacks of reports, evidence photos, and the thin manila folder stamped Stone River Homicide. Inside it lay 2 lives, one ended, one ruined, and a question that refused to leave her alone. Who was Sabrina Brooks before she became a headline? The trail led her to Jackson, Mississippi, a small apartment off Fairview Street with a pink wreath still hanging on the door. Neighbors described Sabrina as quiet, polite, kind of churchy. She worked as a community counselor, helped at a local youth shelter, and spent weekends volunteering at a women's clinic. But there were also murmurs, not cruel, just cautious, about her being different. In her living room, Monroe found everything still in place. Candles on the table, books about self-acceptance, a stack of old letters tied with twine. And on the refrigerator, a single Polaroid, Sabrina and Ethan, side by side in the prison visiting room, hands pressed against the glass. Both smiling, both believing in something that would never survive daylight. The letters told the rest. She'd written to Ethan every week, even before he responded. A total of 17 unanswered messages before his first reply. Her words were full of grace, faith, and cautious hope. But scattered between the lines were hints of fear. Sometimes I wonder if people will ever see me for the person I've become. There are truths I still need to tell you, Ethan. I just hope when I do, you'll still want to hear my voice. And then, one dated just a week before the killing, I'm ready to tell him everything. Maybe this time, honesty will set me free instead of breaking me. Monroe folded the paper, exhaled slowly, and whispered she was trying to do the right thing. Back at Stone River, Monroe met with Warden Miller in his office, a man now aging twice as fast under the weight of scandal. She never should have been allowed in that room unsupervised, Monroe said. She wasn't unsupervised, Miller snapped. There were guards in place. One turned his back for 30 seconds to break up another fight. 30 seconds, detective. That's all it took. He leaned forward, his voice cracking. You know the real problem here? We house men who were raised to hate what they don't understand. Mix that with shame, with pride, and you get murder. Monroe didn't argue. She just took her file and left. That night, she drove 3 hours to meet Sabrina's older sister, Denise Brooks, a nurse living in Biloxi. Denise answered the door with swollen eyes and a worn cardigan, her voice raw from crying. I told her not to go back there, Denise said. Told her to let that man go. But she said he was different. Said he listened. Said he saw her for who she was. She ever mentioned fearing for her safety? Monroe asked. Denise shook her head. No, she believed in forgiveness. Said she could change him. That love could soften even a heart like his. Her voice broke. I guess she was wrong. Monroe stayed silent. Some truths didn't need echoing. Back at headquarters, Monroe compiled her final report. The evidence was clear. Sabrina Brooks had no criminal record, no history of deceit, no financial motive. Every part of her life, from counseling teens to organizing support groups, pointed to a woman trying to build something good out of pain. The file painted a simple but devastating truth. Sabrina hadn't tricked Ethan. She'd loved him, and she died trying to be honest with him. The following week, Monroe returned to Stone River to close out the case. She found Ethan in the infirmary, thinner, quieter, his eyes dull from sedation. I read her letters, she said softly. She loved you, you know. Even after you hit her, even after you screamed at her, she still wrote that she forgave you. Ethan looked up, his voice cracking like broken glass. She should have told me before I found out from them. Monroe studied him for a moment. Would it have changed anything? He didn't answer, just turned away, staring at the wall. After a long silence, Monroe stood. People like her spend their whole lives being brave, she said quietly. People like you spend yours trying to hide from fear. Guess which one wins in the end? She left him there, a man caged by his own choices, haunted by a love he destroyed. Outside, the sky was bleeding orange and gold over the Mississippi horizon. Monroe stopped at a roadside chapel and lit a candle for Sabrina. As the flame flickered, she murmured, "You deserved better." The wind outside carried the faint echo of distant hymns, and for a brief moment, the world seemed to pause, holding its breath for the woman who only wanted to be seen. The trial was set for early winter, but in truth, there wasn't much to try. The evidence was overwhelming: video footage, eyewitness accounts, and his own words caught on camera. "You lied to me." The prosecutors didn't need to embellish. The jury didn't need to deliberate for long. Ethan Cole had killed his wife with his bare hands, and everyone in America had seen it happen. But before the trial began, something unexpected happened inside the isolation wing of Stone River. Ethan asked for paper and a pen. The guards thought it was a suicide note. They weren't wrong to worry. He hadn't spoken to anyone in weeks. He barely ate. He stared at the wall for hours, whispering things under his breath no one could understand. When the request came, the warden hesitated, but then signed off. If the man wanted to write, let him write. So that night, under the yellow flicker of a dying light bulb, Ethan began his final letter. It started with her name, Sabrina, then nothing for 10 minutes. The pen just hovered over the paper as his breathing came slow and uneven. He tried again. "I don't know if you can hear me. I don't even know if I'm talking to a memory or to the part of me that still wants to believe you loved me." He stopped, rubbed his face, and stared down at the dried bloodstain still marking his thumbnail, a remnant the guards had missed. The letter spilled out of him in fragments. Not elegant, not poetic, just raw. "When I met you, I was half a man. You made me feel seen again. You gave me something no one else ever did. Mercy. But mercy scares men like me. I was raised to think love was power, not trust. That a man's worth was in control, not in grace. I told myself you fooled me. Truth is, I fooled myself. I saw what I wanted to see. I wanted the story where someone could love me enough to make me good again. You almost did." He paused, eyes burning, pen trembling between his fingers. "They said you were born a man. I don't even know what that means anymore. You were more of a woman than anyone I've ever known. Stronger, kinder, braver. You faced the world while I hid behind anger. You forgave me while I was busy hating you." A tear slipped down, smearing the ink into a gray blur. "I used to think I was the one trapped in a cage. Turns out the cage was me." By the time the guards made rounds, Ethan had written 8 pages. He folded them carefully, sealed the envelope, and slid it under the cell door with her name written in uneven block letters. For Sabrina. Of course, it would never reach her. But in his mind, she'd read it somewhere, maybe in that quiet, forgiving place where the hurt no longer mattered. When Detective Monroe returned to Stone River 2 days later to finalize her report, the warden handed her the letter. She read it standing in the corridor, her breath catching on certain lines. "If there's a God, he's the one you believed in, the one who forgives cowards like me. Tell her sister I'm sorry. Tell her I finally understand what she meant when she said honesty sets you free. I wish I had the courage to love you for who you were, not who I wanted you to be." Monroe closed the letter quietly. No one spoke for a long time. Outside the cell, the air smelled of bleach and cold metal. Inside, Ethan sat on the floor, head bowed, hands clasped as if in prayer. "Did you mean it?" Monroe asked softly. He didn't look up. "Every word." "Then why did you kill her?" He swallowed, eyes glistening. "Because I was scared, and scared men do stupid things." That night, he was moved to a holding cell to await sentencing. He lay awake until morning, staring through the bars, whispering her name like a confession, like an apology that could never be heard. When the guards came to escort him to court, he turned once toward the empty corridor and said, almost to himself, "If she was here, she'd tell me to forgive myself." The guard frowned. "You think she'd forgive you after what you did?" Ethan managed a weak, broken smile. "She already did. That's the problem." The courtroom in Jackson, Mississippi, was silent when Ethan Cole entered in shackles. The only sound was the soft scrape of his chains against the tile floor. The man who had once filled an entire room with fury now looked hollow, smaller, older, worn down by the weight of what he'd done. His orange jumpsuit hung loose on his frame. His eyes, once hard as stone, had dulled into something almost empty. Across the aisle sat Sabrina's sister, Denise Brooks. She wore black and held a folded photo of her sister, smiling in front of a church, sunlight glinting off her silver cross. When her name was called, Denise stood. Her voice trembled but never broke. "Sabrina spent her whole life fighting to be seen," she said. "She forgave everyone who hurt her, even him. But forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting. It doesn't mean no one pays the price." Her words hung in the air, trembling with truth. Ethan didn't lift his head. The prosecution called it a hate crime born of shame. The defense called it a moment of confusion and panic. The jury didn't call it anything. They just watched the video. 46 seconds of blurred motion, choking sounds, and a body collapsing to the floor. When it ended, the room was silent except for the faint hum of the air conditioner. It took the jury less than 4 hours to decide. Guilty. Life imprisonment without parole. The judge, an older man with gray hair and a voice heavy with disappointment, spoke quietly. "Mr. Cole, what you did was not just a murder. It was an act of fear. And fear, left unchecked, is the oldest form of hatred there is." Ethan didn't respond, only whispered, "I know." Outside the courthouse, protesters gathered in the autumn rain, some holding signs for justice, others holding Bibles and shouting condemnation. Two sides of a world that still couldn't agree on what Sabrina's life had meant. Cameras flashed as Denise stepped down the courthouse steps, clutching her sister's photo to her chest. "She just wanted to be loved," Denise said to the press, "and the world made her pay for it." That line, raw, human, and devastating, became the quote that defined the case. Within hours, it was on every network, every headline, every screen. In prison, Ethan adjusted to the rhythm of a life without time. The guards didn't speak to him much. Neither did the other inmates. He was the man who killed his own wife. Even in Stone River, that carried a special kind of shame. He spent most days in the chapel, sitting alone in the last pew, staring at the cross. Sometimes he wrote letters he'd never sent. Sometimes he just sat there, lips moving silently, asking for something even he couldn't name. 6 months later, a local church in Jackson held a memorial for Sabrina Brooks. Candles lined the altar. Her photo stood beneath a banner that read, "Love lives beyond fear." Detective Monroe sat in the back pew, out of uniform, hands folded in her lap. When the choir began to sing Amazing Grace, she closed her eyes. In that moment, it wasn't about the case, the evidence, or the verdict. It was about a woman who had dared to live as herself, and a man who couldn't bear what that truth reflected in him. After the service, Denise found Monroe outside under the rain-damp magnolia trees. Do you think he ever really loved her? Denise asked. Monroe looked out toward the candlelight flickering through the church windows. I think he did, she said softly. But love without understanding is just a spark. It burns bright, and then it destroys everything it touches. Denise nodded, tears slipping down her cheeks. She reached into her purse and handed Monroe a small folded note. The last page of Ethan's confession, sent to her through the court clerk. Monroe unfolded it under the streetlight. The handwriting was shaky but deliberate. Tell her I see her now. I see everything. The camera of the world moved on eventually. Another case, another headline. But in Mississippi, every year on the anniversary of Sabrina's death, a small group still gathers at that same church. They light candles. They say her name. And as the glow spreads across the pews, someone always whispers the same words. The one she wrote before walking into Stone River for the last time. Honesty doesn't destroy love. Fear does. The choir hums quietly in the background, voices blending with the wind through the magnolias. The light flickers once and then holds steady. In the end, it wasn't her secret that killed her. It was his inability to face it. And in that truth lies the most tragic sentence of all.